I'm Carol Wick, if I haven't met you before, with Sharity Global, and so excited to be here with Ann Miskey, who is our facilitator today. We're going to have a really great conversation. Hi, Kathy. How are you? I know Kathy.
You, I do.
Um, if you don't mind, if you want to keep your cameras off just until we ask for questions, that would be awesome. Just part of the recording process. Um, so we are starting our second three-part series. Really excited, as I mentioned, about this three-part series because as we started thinking about what is it that we can do for the people that we know are out there in the nonprofit world with us, and we realized that there are three really heavy burning questions. The first of those being, what is it that let's see if we can get this to now advance. Um, what are the issues that that face nonprofit that we're seeing are facing the nonprofit CEOs? And one of them is definitely having to do with health issues. We're seeing a lot of CEOs with chronic health issues with that are struggling with how they are going to maintain just their ability to have their jobs. They're ending up in emergency rooms, in hospitals. So we're going to be talking about that next month. We're also going to be talking about the dreaded founder syndrome. And how do you, as a founder, if you are a founder, make that transition healthy and happy and sustainably? And if you are inheriting an organization from a founder, how can you do that and actually not end up being like the trial person that gets the tried on and then they end up bringing the founder back or worse yet, finding someone new. So we'll be talking about that in March. Today, we're going to be talking about boards, but Anne and I wanted to put a different spin on this. We wanted to talk about what if we just completely rethought boards of directors? And I think it's time. We spend a lot of money doing paying for consultants to come in, and I think it's time we just rethink it altogether. So as we go through today, just a little bit of nuts and bolts. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. Ann and I will answer those questions as we go along. And at the end, we're going to ask you to come all back off on turn your cameras on and ask questions. So be thinking about what those burning questions are as we really start to just open our minds and rethink. But first, just a titch about Sharity in case you're new. We are a team of now almost 26 experts in various types of nonprofit work. Everything from issues around gender-based violence, homelessness, um, environment and animals to um, colleges and 10-figure asks. Um, we also work all over the world. So we hit our 33rd country this year, which is really exciting. And a lot of people don't know that Charity is this big. But we're an amazing group of experts that are here to help make whatever your challenges are go away. And then we go away. That's our success is when we're able to help organizations be sustainable and not need a consultant anymore. So, like I mentioned, we have lots of different things that help your organization become sustainable and to help them scale, including a class coming up in sustainable nonprofits and how you can actually take a group course and go through our little secret recipe of how to become a stronger, more sustainable organization. And if you read the Philanthropy Today article this week about the response to the new administration needs to be the same one that we had to COVID, really rethinking how we're fundraising and how we're responding to potential unknown crises, being prepared. So we're here as your thought leader and your partner, and if you need anything. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann.
Thank you, Carol. And thanks everybody for joining us today for this topic of conversation. Now, for any of us who've been involved in the not-for-profit sector for a while, and I'm assuming that's all of us, whether we have worked or are working as a CEO ED, whether we sit on boards or have been on boards, we all know that that board and CEO ED relationship is key to success. It can also be one of the most difficult things that we deal with. I read a stat once, don't quote me, but I would not be surprised if it's true, that boards are one of the number one reasons that CEOs will leave an organization. It's just like in employment, it's often the boss, not the work, right? That causes you to leave. So today we want to spend a little bit of time talking about our experiences with boards of directors. And then, as Carol mentioned earlier, how do we, rather than trying to constantly fix something, should we be looking at, is this the structure we really need to effectively bring our various missions to life in the community? And I also want to put a little proviso on that. I think we've all worked with amazing boards and amazing board members. So I don't want to paint everybody in the same way. There are people who really, truly understand what it is to be on a board and the importance of that. But too often we spend time as nonprofits or nonprofit leaders, or even as board members, dealing with issues that get in the way of our mission. Now, at any time, if any of this resonates, please just put something in the chat, or if you have a thought or idea, we'll be keeping an eye on the chat and would love you to share your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences. So again, we know that nonprofits really are always faced with the perennial challenge of achieving an ambitious mission with severely limited resources and capacities. But we do look at our boards for helping us, right, to sustain, to get the mission out, and especially for financial sustainability. But then we deal with the day-to-day reality. So let's talk a little bit today about what is some of the reality that some of us have experienced working with boards. So let's move to the next slide, and we'll see if any of this resonates with people. And again, we all know really great board members, so I'm not suggesting that they're all like this.
No, but we certainly have all experienced these. And I think, just like when you are running a program and you have 80% of the clients are just amazing to work with and they're wonderful and they're grateful. And then you have 20% that are really loud and angry. And those are the ones that take up 90% of your time. I think these are the big challenges that we think about when we think about boards. And the first one I'm going to mention and talk about it, which is actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to let Anne talk about the bully. I'm going to let you go first.
Okay, thanks, Carol. So the bully board. Who's the bully board member? Well, just like our school bullies, those are people who come in. They often wield a certain level of power, whether they're bringing resources to the table, financial resources, or it could be connections or knowledge. And unfortunately, rather than using this with humility and as a way to help advance the mission and support the leader, they use it as a sledgehammer, right? Because they know that you are afraid to say or do anything because you could lose what they bring to the table. Now, what's often even more distressing, and I've seen it happen in real time, is bullies can be charismatic and they can draw other people to them. Think of, again, the bully and his or her group on the schoolyard who gathers other people together and then decides to pick on whoever it is. Well, in the case of boards, it can often be the CEO or the ED that is the target, and the bully can gather these board members around them, and suddenly you're the target of bullying in a variety of ways. And it can be subtle and it can be direct. So if you've experienced this, I'd love for you to just you don't have to, but if you've experienced the bully board, just let us know. Yeah, that sounds familiar. Carol?
Yeah, and I know all of us have had this, and it's often accompanied by the next person that we want to talk about that sometimes shows up on board members, and that's the guru. And this is the person who knows everything. They tend to monopolize board meetings. They tend to hijack agendas. They are the wise person that has something to say about every single one of the issues that comes up, whether they really know anything about it or not. I think one of the things is that this often comes from a place of inadequacy. and almost fear, because a lot of times they're in a board with other individuals that are very highly qualified and skilled. And so the guru comes in and they have something to say about everything. This is also the person that many times will try to get into your business and operations. They will many times be that person that wants to know every single detail. Um, and they can be maddening in how they're always wanting to pick up the phone and call program staff, for instance. They're wanting information from your accountant and things like this. They can just be very, very time consuming and not really terribly helpful. This is opposed to the guru who really truly knows what they're doing and offers sage advice on a regular basis that you just really treasure. So I'm sure some of you have had this type of board member as well. But the hedgehog is almost the opposite of the guru. This is a person that truly doesn't say much. And they actually talk about hedgehogs in classes. If you take a class at the Kennedy School at Harvard, you'll learn about hedgehogs. And if you think about what a hedgehog does, a hedgehog has a little bitty soft body, but when they're threatened, they bristle up and become really big and prickly. So this is the person that perhaps is got experience in finance, or they have expertise in one particular area and they really don't say much on the board. They don't really contribute much. They don't help much. But when their area of expertise is brought up, they puff up and they monopolize the entire room. And so much so that they don't give anybody else space to breathe or do anything because they're the expert and no one can challenge them. So it really shuts down conversation, it shuts down participation, and it shuts down a board's ability to really counter this person because they present themselves as the ultimate expert in this issue. And this is actually, hedgehogs actually become a pretty serious problem, believe it or not, with boards of directors when you have other board members that aren't willing to challenge them. And if they get off on a wrong tangent, these are the people that end up getting board members fired a lot of times. They get something that they're just so intensely driven on. They can also be led down the wrong road by the wrong people. And then you have anyone who tries to stop them, they bristle up and they become really sometimes a threat to your organization. So the last one, Anne, you want to cover the last one, which I don't think will allow us to see it. Yeah.
So the last one, and I was trying to think of various names for this, but the ladies who lunch was one, but it could be the gentlemen who lunch, the do-gooders, the people who often come onto a board because they are well-intentioned, right? They do believe, okay, we're going to help those people. And I think that says it right there. They're going to help those people. It's the white savior. It's the person who has not the first clue about really the issues that you're dealing with the client issues you're dealing with, or with the complexity of the work that you are doing. And they will often focus on things that are really not issues that are big or of major concern, but they focus their energy. I had one colleague, a CEO of a good-sized organization, who had a couple of these ladies on her board, and they basically spent their entire time on the board talking about, what color the walls were painted, what color were the napkins going to be at the gala, and these kinds of things consumed their energy, but they were also very, very demanding of the CEO or ED's time, because they were insistent that they were doing good work and that because they were on the board, they had a say. Another example, we had a big gala in my organization. We raised over $1 million at this gala annually. One of these ladies came to me after one of the galas and told me, didn't suggest or ask, told me that in future we weren't going to serve alcohol at our gala because that was not appropriate, because some of the clients we dealt with had alcohol issues. Therefore, I was informed that alcohol was not appropriate. And, it was kind of, again, not understanding the issues that we're dealing with. The fact that a gala, you do want people to have a glass of wine and give. So these are just some. There are more, there are more types of board members that we deal with. But one of the things that is consistent when we come across these types of board members is who has to deal with it. Often it's the ED or the CEO who spends an inordinate amount of time dealing with the board members that are sucking his or her time, energy that could be better used on the mission of the organization. And unfortunately, boards are often not set up in a way that knows how to deal with these people. So again, it falls on the shoulders of your organizational leadership. So what we want to talk about today, again, is reimagining our boards, not just to deal with the individuals. We use those as an example. There are dysfunctional boards in other ways besides the people that work there. And so what we want to talk about today is how do we rethink the creation of and the organization, the management, if you will, of boards in a way that really help and support not just the CEO and the ED, but more importantly, the mission of the organization. And it has to be, it can't be one person. It can't be the ED who's trying to figure this out. It needs to be the sector to begin with, but organizationally, the boards themselves have to come to setting up some things that limit this kind of ineffective board governance and really support the mission of the organization.
And and that makes me think about when I do strategic planning with organizations. Oftentimes they're surprised when I set aside 3 to 4 hours just for the board of directors to come up with their own strategic plan for them. And I typically do this at the end of the planning session where the board is then asked to come up with a plan of what do you need to look like and what do you need to do to support this organization in achieving these goals. And many of them don't want to even have that conversation. They're really uncomfortable with the idea that yes, there'll be some expectation of fundraising, but somehow or another they have to be an equal partner with their own strategic plan, their own KPIs, their own dashboard. Many of them embrace it, but it really is a way to rethink what the organization is expecting from boards of directors and what that needs to look like moving forward. I think that is just one little piece of this, but as you and I've also discussed, there are no guardrails for nonprofit board members. You and I both sat on for-profit boards, and there's lots of guardrails. There's lots of incentives to work, but with nonprofits, there really isn't any kind of accountability in play at all.
And, not only is there a lack of accountability, and again, I'm speaking broadly, so not about individuals, there is often almost an arrogance of people who come on nonprofit boards thinking, I'm coming with a business background or law, and I'm going to fix that nonprofit because they don't know what they're, that sense of that somehow nonprofits don't know how to operate properly. Those of us who have led a nonprofit, it is a business, different kind of business, and it requires all the same knowledge and skills and abilities that a for-profit business has on probably a quarter of the resources. So this idea of, again, having board members coming on, really understanding and creating those, as you said, guardrails.
Yeah, absolutely. So how many of you have actually thought of, what if I could just get rid of my board and start from scratch? Completely rethink who is on your board, what they're supposed to do, anything like that. Just completely rethink why your board exists from the get-go. I mean, if that's just rethinking, and that's what we want to do today. We really want to just have you all imagine what could be, because I think it's time. It is really, really time for that to happen.
Now, one of the things, and we'll get back to this in the poll, hopefully we can get it launched, is let me just ask people, and again, you can put it in the comments. What are some of the main reasons, or what are some of the main things you look at when recruiting board members? What would you say for your organization is one of the first top 2 things that you look for when looking for a board member? As someone who's been a CEO and an ED for many years, the honest answer is often money, right? We're
Yes.
constantly looking for funds. And so who do we look at when we're looking um, at our board recruitment list is how much money can they bring, or do they have connections to money and influence? We also look at skill set. Oh, financial commitment. There we go. Top 5 nonprofits in your household so they can walk the talk. Right. We do that too because we started to get away from the board give get because we felt, well, it was prohibiting certain people that we wanted on the board because they don't have the financial means. But then we would say, let's be the top 5, top 3 of your giving. We did a bit of an analysis in my organization and found out that some of those board members were giving $25 a year. So I'm like, and I knew that they had a lot more means than that. So it was kind of an out for some of the board members.
Actually, I was going to just say I was doing a strategic planning session, and one of the issues that the CE had brought up was only about 25% of their board were doing an annual gift. And so I did a show of hands during the meeting. We had figured out and strategized how we would address this in the planning session. And I said, what percentage of you actually give? And every one of them raised their hands, every single one of them. And I said, no, you have 75% of you that do not write a check every year. And they were just horrified because they had all just kind of been living this myth that they gave and convincing each other that they all gave. And so when we called them out, it really made them step back. They were one of those boards I made spend 4 hours doing their own board strategy. But the reality is that a lot of board members either don't give or they don't give to the level that they should be giving or could be giving.
And, there's a comment here about that then we have to find a way to fundraise. The question I would have, because again, we look at one of the major responsibilities of nonprofit boards is the financial sustainability of the organization, fundraising. How many boards actually? You may have the occasional board. Usually it's driven by 1 or 2 people on the board who kind of take on that role and drive the whole board. In my experience, and a lot of the CEOs I've spoken to over the years, it's a constant struggle that it's usually done by staff with the occasional help of a board member. And then there are those few board members that have lots of means and might give a big amount annually. But for the most part, and again, if any of you have experienced differently, great. But in my experience in talking to others, I very rarely see boards. They don't like to fundraise. They don't want to. And I know in my world, I've done hoops to try to say, all you have to do, could you take me to coffee with a friend of yours? I'll do even that is like pulling teeth. So yes.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Carol.
I was going to add, if you think about it, one of the things that I often do when I'm talking to for-profit board members, because they do seem to think that somehow or another, when you go to work for a nonprofit, you lose IQ points. But when I talk to for-profit board members, they don't truly understand the revenue model. And they don't understand that in a for-profit, all they have to do is create a product or service that is so wonderful that people want to buy it at a value that's more than it costs them to produce it, right? That's it. They market to those people, they sell it to those people. It's a one-to-one. It's either B2C, B2B, business to customer or business to business, right? On the flip side, to a nonprofit, we have to deal with our customers who are clients, who are people who are hurting, who cannot afford or cannot pay for our services. At least there's no expectation that they're going to pay full price for services. And then we have to convince someone else who is not receiving the service to give us money to pay for the service over here. Whether it's for animals, for the environment, for human beings, it doesn't matter. We're having to have 2 distinct target markets. And many board members don't get that. I personally think that is 10 times harder to convince someone who's not going to get anything for what we're doing and have them pay for a service that doesn't directly benefit them in any way. Now, maybe we can make some cases about the business benefiting because it's their employees or, kids graduating that helps businesses into pipeline, school pipeline and all of those sorts of things. But the reality is we're not directly doing something for their business, like providing them with copy paper or, technical support for something. So when we explain that to board members, and then we think about what do we really need board members to do in that role in sales, we are asking them to go to this person who has no connection to the product, can make an emotional connection for the most part. Sometimes it's an economic ROI study that we do, but make an emotional connection so that they care enough to give some of their profit to us. So we're basically going after people's profit margin that they've done through their B2B or B2C. And I know hopefully everybody followed me with that, but it really makes no sense when you think about the business model. And then when we talk to them about what we need them to do and really what we need them to do, which is to go after people's profit, to go after their savings and ask them to give it to this other organization so that we can pay our employees, we can do the good work, make sure people don't sleep on the streets, die on the streets, whatever that might be. And we're beholden, Michelle said, we're beholden to a capitalist system that doesn't really allow human beings as their bottom line. And honestly, Ann and I were talking before the webinar, a lot of these people don't really even care. I mean, not everybody. There's so many people that care, so many people that are wonderful. But the reality of it is there are a lot of people, they don't care if people are hungry or die on the streets. Here in Florida, we just passed a law that criminalizes sleeping outdoors. These people have no place else to go. And we're going to put them in jail because they have no place else to go because the rents went up, insurance went up to the point where they lost their home and they're 70 years old. That's where we are in our society. So the idea that fundraising is getting harder, getting board members to open doors is getting harder. Again, I think that's why we have to step back and really rethink this. And I'll get off my soapbox now, Ann, and pass it back to you. But
yeah, no, I think your point is really well taken. And we had somebody come talk to our board about finances, and they said it's like the way nonprofits are treated. It's like you go into Starbucks and you say, I want my venti latte, blah, 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 but I'm only paying for the coffee. I'm not paying for anything else. And that's another piece of that. Or, I'll buy your client a cup of coffee, but I'm only paying for the coffee. They can get their own cup. And, it's that kind of attitude. But this leads nicely into the idea of let's reimagine. Let's reimagine boards. And let's move to our next slide if we can. And somebody had put earlier about aligning mission. And so I want to talk about starting with board recruitment. And that aligning mission is vital, but we often give lip service to what that means. And what we often do is basically say, do you care about people who are homeless? Yes, I care about people. Great, you're mission aligned. Instead of really looking at the mission being also connected with expertise. So what do I mean by that? We think of expertise, and these are needed on our board. You want somebody who brings the financial expertise or is an HR lawyer, especially if you work in California. You need an HR lawyer on your board. And that's what we think of as expertise. But do we think in terms of experts in the field we're working in? Do we think about the expertise that they have working with clients, or they themselves have personal experience? When we talk about people with lived experience, that community experience, and that also brings connections and understanding to your work. So yes, we need those lawyers and those finance people, but we really need people who truly, deeply they are experts in our mission. It's not just that they're good people, that they understand, and often bring on people who maybe are retired nonprofit workers, people who know the reality of what you're dealing with, what you're struggling, and can be a voice other than that of the ED or CEO as to what is the reality of the work that we are doing and the people that we are serving. So those community, engaging the community, really, when we say community, the broad community in that board. Carol.
Yeah, and when I ran a domestic violence shelter, I was there for about a decade, and we stepped back and we began to do this years ago. And gosh, now it was almost 20 years ago. But what we did was we stepped back and said, we're going to get rid of this advisory board, which is basically had become a dumping ground for people that they had made angry, and we're trying to find a holding space for them. They were moving them off the board. They were doing something. And we said, what systems do our survivors interact with? Everything from the hospitals, the emergency first responders, faith groups. We had someone from the ME's office, and we had people who were pretty high up that we recruited. And we just went down, and you couldn't come on the advisory board unless you filled one of those slots. So we had someone who, well, actually, with domestic violence, it wasn't hard that most of the people either had been a child who witnessed it or had been a survivor themselves of domestic violence. So that wasn't a problem. It was about 80% of our board. But helping people open up doors. We went in and said, we need people inside the system so that when we need a door opened, when we have an issue at a system, when there is a structural or systemic issue, we can go to these people and they can be our champion within that system. And it was incredibly, incredibly powerful in the work that we were doing. Unfortunately, we were still driven by, we might look at an HR attorney or that sort of thing, but part of our thinking and in recruiting people was always our bottom line. We were always thinking about how can this person bring us money? What business are they connected to that can write a big check? And I think that we were never as far advanced as we should have been there. But I wish now that my advisory board, it was really a much more powerful group, had been my board of directors. And I just want to also throw this out. One of the things that is something that I'm seeing be a very, very powerful trend nationally is keeping your fiduciary board very small. Having a fiduciary board that's maybe, say, 6 or 9 people, and they just focus on finance, accountability, that sort of thing. And the rest of your board of directors, the rest of the people that are involved are those issue experts. They're people who are opening doors, making connections. They know that's their purpose. They're very clear that they're there for systemic change, which also means, again, elevating the work and sustainability of the organization, but they're not having to deal with the finances and the audit and that sort of thing. So making that a tighter group actually, I think, lends more control for the ED. It's fewer people you have to deal with. And it also keeps a lot of those bullies and those sorts of people over here and allows you to keep this nice tight group that's really your thought leaders on your internal structure, as opposed to this really big, large, we need more board members because we need to fundraise more. So I just want to add that it seems to be working really, really well for a lot of my clients is to have that smaller, tight, still very thought leadership group of people.
I love that. I think I'm going to talk to my board about that right now. I'm going to jump a little bit because we talked about expertise and then the mandatory training. So point number 6. The reason I say this is I think often what happens is we bring board members on, we do a little bit of an orientation, and then basically it's just the status quo. And one of the things that I saw in my work is I worked in a very, very complex field. They all are complex, don't get me wrong. I know lots of issues, but I was working in Los Angeles in homelessness, which if you've ever been there, if you know, it is the epicenter. And what I very quickly realized is I had some wonderful board members. I didn't have problems, but they really didn't understand the issue and they didn't understand what the struggles were that we were dealing with. So I went to my board with the okay of my governance committee, which I insisted that we needed a governance committee. As I said, we want to start doing board education and deep board education, not on how to read the budget, but to understand homelessness. And we took our board in a very, very deep dive over a 2-year period, and then we continued it after that into understanding the reality of what people were experiencing on the street. And this was led, and we worked together with people with lived experience to do this. We took them on what we called a journey through homelessness. And a couple examples, we took them to our shelter. We were going to eat lunch there. A lot of them had volunteered for our lunch program, serving lunch, and they all went, oh, great, we can all volunteer when we go to eat lunch. And I said, no, you're not volunteering. Staff are serving. You're sitting down at the table and eating with people who are living at the shelter. We'd already gotten the okay and the permission by the people because that is their home, whether it was temporary or not. They said, sure. So our board members sat down and ate lunch with the people experiencing homelessness. All of them expressed that was a huge aha moment for them. The comments I got was, they're just like me. To care what Sarah Carol was saying earlier about asking people to give money for someone else, suddenly they're making a human connection. The other thing we did is we went to some of our buildings, our supportive housing, and I said to staff that are working there, our board is coming. They probably want to ask you some questions. And they're like, well, what should we say? And I said, give the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is our board. They need to know the reality. So the staff talked about the struggles that they had and the lack of resources. We raised more funds that day from our board than we had the entire year because they connected to the cause and the people. And after that, we did constant training with our board and teaching with our board and provided them with resources. Best thing we ever did. So even if you don't bring subject matter experts onto your board, there are things you can do to deeply make them understand your mission, but most importantly, to connect on a human level with the people that you serve.
Well, and that kind of addresses that issue of we jokingly called them the ladies who lunch, and we're picking on women when that's not really, it's not exclusive to women by any stretch of the imagination. But, it's the people who don't understand why you don't get someone up at your luncheon and have them pour their guts out in front of a group of people, sobbing and re-experiencing their trauma in front of a group of strangers. I absolutely will not do that anymore. These are people with lived experience. They're experts. They should be paid and treated like any other speaker. And treating, having them make that connection, but having them make it so that they can become better governance leaders rather than having them make the connection so they can write a bigger check. And I think we always have to kind of check ourselves as well. So I think that orientation, though, I just want to stress, so many nonprofits have stopped doing orientation. And when we go in, one of the first things we say, do you have an orientation process for your board members? And it's not just orientation. It has to start with the accountability you put in play. So when you go out and interview a board member, it needs to be a board member interview, like an employee interview. You need to screen them. You need to make sure there is that mission philosophy alignment. You need to make sure that they understand exactly what you're expecting them to do. Exactly. This is not a time to sugarcoat it. How much time it's going to take, what you expect them to do in terms of opening doors. Let them know. Have that conversation. Make sure that just like you would with an employee, you're actually having that, and then have them sign off on that before they get through the door. Do reference checks. What are they like on a board of directors? Because you know what, people will say, oh, they're so great, but then you get them on your board and you end up with one of those archetypes, and then you're really hosed. So making sure that you're really having all of that accountability, really strong structure to your board meetings, all of those things in place ahead of time, along with that orientation that connects them to the mission, will save so many problems down the road. It's just unfortunate that we're always going so fast, we don't stop and do the things that avoid what causes us the problems and sucks up all our times down the road. So I know, for me, that was something that creating that, just letting them know what all the acronyms were. The last thing you want is a board member that's sitting in a board meeting and they're like, oh, it took me a year to get up to speed on the financials. I'm like, then we're not doing our job right.
We did at one of our training sessions because we had a lot of government funding, right? Federal, state, county, local. And we took them through an exercise so that they understood not only the acronyms, but how the funding process worked. And again, they were like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. So again, deep dive. And to what Carol was saying, what's really important about putting these things in place is that it takes the pressure off leadership, off your CEO, ED, to deal with this. These are board issues, and too often the CEO is the one having to figure things out, deal with the bad board person, going to their board chair, say, please do something.
Right.
But you set up at the beginning the process that they all sign off on, and then they're our boss, but we're also holding our board accountable to say, you have a process, and it's up to you to administer that process, not me. This is a board thing. And I think when things are written and people have signed off, and then we put in process a very clear, 6 months in, you'd get a letter, or at the end of the year before you could re-up on the board, all of these things would be looked at very carefully. The other, go ahead.
I was going to say, having a personal dashboard for each board member and having that lines up against that roles and responsibilities. I have literally boards now that have dashboards where they track for every single member how much you gave, how many meetings you came, how many committee meetings you attended, how many people you introduced, and they track it for every single board member. And then they have to sign that recommitment letter at the end of every year, which I do have several forms that I'm happy to give you if you reach out to me after this webinar. And one of them is called Today, Tomorrow, Forever, which is a form that we used to sit down with our board members every year, and they would have to think about what are they going to do this next year? What committee are they going to serve on? What's their gift going to be? What fundraiser are they going to work on? What are they going to do if we have a capital campaign? What's their gift there if they haven't given one? And then do they have us in their will? So it gave us an opportunity to talk about all those things, and then they had to recommit to all the roles and responsibilities. So it was an opportunity for myself and the board chair to meet with every board member once a year and make sure that they were still committed, and also give them an out if life had changed, which we don't often do. It's like a life sentence. I always tell my boards when I work with them, this is not parole. You are not held to this bed, to this board. If you don't want to be here, walk away. It's okay. Really.
100%. I think that's so true, where you assume that people are staying on the board when it's their time to go. And they're often sitting there going, I'm really ready to go, but I don't want to do that to this organization I love. So gracious way of giving people an out. I also want to talk a little bit about in the orientation. This is something that sort of hit me in the face, an experience that I had in my organization a couple of years ago, where we did the orientation, but what we weren't clear on was we were clear on our mission, but we weren't clear on our values. And what I mean by that is that we talked about needing diversity on our board, and diversity, whether it be racial, ethnic, gender, whatever. We also value diversity of thought, because if you all think the same way, you're all going to go to the same direction, whether it's the right direction or not. And so we talked about the importance of diversity of thought. But what got us into trouble is we didn't clarify that, yes, diversity of thought and opinion, but there are certain things we hold true as an organization upon which we will not deviate. And this came down to, again, dealing with homelessness. We started to talk a lot about racial inequity and racism as the root of homelessness. And this board member objected very loudly and very strongly. I had staff in tears. I had board members complain. I even had consultants we were working with saying this person is actively racist. And how dare we talk about racism and homelessness? That's not why he's on the board. And it created a huge issue because some on our board said, well, he's got money and influence. We need to pacify him and keep him. And okay, maybe we shouldn't be talking so much about racism. And so we realized that we needed to have a value statement, a philosophy statement of who we are and what our beliefs are that we will not deviate from. We don't care if the tablecloths are purple or green, but we are an anti-racist organization. And if that is not something you believe in, then this is not the organization for you. And I think that's really vital, that we often forget that in the search for those expertise or the funding.
And I'm sorry, I want to throw in there too an example of a board member that I was interviewing who was of a different religion, and we certainly embraced cultural diversity, but he went on about how he believed in arranged marriages and that it wasn't his daughter's choice, that he would arrange a marriage for her. And I said, look, I appreciate who you are. I appreciate your connections, but this is not a philosophy fit. Sadly, another ED then of a similar organization took him on as a board member, which, just goes to show that having those strong philosophies and making sure that they align to your core values that you have written out is so critically important. And that way, again, it makes it very clear for everyone. I want to, we're going to let you guys take questions, but I want to very quickly touch on number 7, because Ann and I both have had bad experiences with boards. And when you go through an experience of a board, a bad experience with a board, what you realize is you are not alone. It is really one of the unwritten, unspoken truths in the nonprofit and in the faith sector of doing a great job, going along, and all of a sudden, wham, coming out of the blue. So I want to just take a moment just to say that it's important to build in safeguards, but also accountability for the CEO, because I see it in both sides. I see CEOs who've gone rogue, who are not doing their job, who've stayed on too long, and they're not accomplishing anything. They've just been there forever and everybody loves them regardless of whether they produce anything. And then on the other side, a CEO who is really pushing the envelope, they're making a difference, and then they get the wind knocked out of them and they get fired for no reason at all other than they went up against the system for the most part, or they spoke the truth. And so building in safeguards where you have a really strong dashboard that is measurable and objective so that you can be measured against something that is tangible. The other is having a contract in place, especially if you do social justice work. If you have to speak the truth, you have to have something, and I cannot stress this enough, a contract in place that says, if the board fires you for no cause, this is what will happen as a consequence. And in the process, there's an independent third-party mediator prior to termination that will be selected by both parties that will come in and try to mediate this. That will save so many problems. When you get a rogue board member who tries that hedgehog that tries to lead the board off in one direction, a system, person that decides that they don't want you in that position anymore because you're causing too much trouble, and you've ruffled the wrong feathers. We cannot do this work if we don't have some safeguards in place from those people who might feel uncomfortable. And I fear a lot of times, especially when I look in the gender-based violence field, I fear that so many people are afraid of what will happen if they ruffle feathers, that we have not ruffled enough feathers. We need to kind of be able to go back to the 70s and really be able to speak our truth. But without the safeguards in place, I feel like that's just not going to happen. So I want to just encourage you all to be thinking about both sides of that, right? You can't have one accountability without safeguards.
And I was going to say, to that point, I would say that this is where we would say we want to be more like a business. Where a lot of the people, well, you don't need that. It's kind of a love fest. And I'm going, no, we are a professional organization and we will have professional standards and safeguards in place, legal, and, is very important. And you'd come at it from a very professional place. And I will say that if you come into an organization like that as a CEO or an ED, you can generate more respect on your board by coming in to say, no, this is what I need to be an effective leader. And too often we kind of, and I was guilty of this, younger, kind of, I don't know, it was very different than in a business situation. And it's like, no, we should establish as leaders from day one how we are going to operate, and also the expectations of how we work together with the board. And we have the ability to kind of create that from day one. And it's the bully. If you're weak, they'll go after you. If you come in with some real strength and this is what we're going to do and this is how we do it, you will often find that people will go, okay, I respect that. She's a strong, or he's a strong leader, and I will follow that.
Or as a woman, they're calling you a bitch. But
yeah, that's right.
I could say that. All right. So I'm just gonna do this last slide, and then we're gonna go to some questions. Just a quick reminder that we have two more of this series coming up. And if you do have, you're already signed up, so you'll already get the notifications. But if you do have anything in the next series that we're planning for the spring that's a burning issue that you'd like to have us cover in our thought leadership series, please let either Ann or I know. So I'm going to stop sharing real quick and let you guys turn your cameras on if you're interested in asking us a question or sharing an experience that you've had. Certainly, we've been in the sector. I see that there's some folks out there that have been in the sector for about 40 years that have added some comments in here. Tish, does anybody have any? Does anybody have any questions? First off, that they'd like to ask? Oh, come on. I know there's got to be some great questions here. Or any thoughts or comments? Go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi. I saw that someone had just posted establishing core values was really helpful. I've been wanting to do that, but I'm looking for a good format. Does anyone have one to share?
Yeah, I have one I can share with you. Actually, a really simple process, believe it or not, I learned from Disney about how you want people to feel, and starting at it from a place of emotional intelligence. And how do we want people to feel? And then what are the behaviors we want people to exhibit? How do we know? How can we visibly see that someone's feeling that way? I find that if we start with that, and our core values are more true to who we are, and that we want to have people feel accepted, then we can make a statement about what that means for our organization. If we want, rather than just saying DEI or whatever the term might be, that's just kind of a jargoning term. So I'd be happy to share that process with you.
Okay, I had put my email up there because I also liked your other list.
Good.
About the board commitments.
Okay.
One of the things we started doing with our values, and we do this at both the staff and board level, because those are the kinds of things we create. We put them on a shelf, and you maybe pull them out once a year. And so really two things we started to do. One, we recognize that if you don't build relationships with people, none of this is going to actually work, the values. You have to really build those connections. And so how do you as a leader help your board, your staff, build that true sense of relationship, and that you're in this together, and use your values as a way to help that. So as Carol said, how do you want to feel in this? How do you want to work together? And then what we started doing, both board and staff meetings, is at the beginning, we actually go through those every board meeting. And we ask different people to lead, and sometimes they'll just go through all of them. And other times they'll pick one and say, how are we doing on this? And let's be real and have a real conversation. Are we actually fulfilling this value that we said we're going to do? And let's give some examples of how, and let's talk about how we're not doing that and what we can do. So we made it a living document, and about 20 minutes at the beginning of every board meeting, we go through these. And, does it overnight? Things aren't perfect, but it keeps us focused on those. And that has been really, really helpful, just to make that part of who we are as an organization.
And I'll add two other ways to use it. We would have the core value emotions across the top and then the behaviors down below. And during a job interview or an interview with a board member, we would circle the behaviors that they exhibited. And our HR attorney actually told us that that is a valid way to do this. And Disney's philosophy, I'm from Orlando, so you know, Disney's philosophy is you can train someone to do anything. You cannot change who they are as a person and their core values. So you want to make sure that first and foremost that those are in alignment. And after we started doing that, we had an evaluation every like 2 years where someone would come in and its researcher would come in and she said, I don't know what you did, but this is the best culture of a domestic violence I've ever been at in my entire life. And we were so proud of that because our core values were calm, safe, serene, and appreciated. We wanted everyone to feel calm at all times because we were in the crisis business. Not everything was a crisis. We wanted them to feel safe, whether it was staff going out at 2 a.m. or a client in the shelter. We wanted them to feel a sense of serenity when they came into contact with us. And then finally, everybody was appreciated. We appreciated survivors for risking their lives to come and seek services. We appreciated our donors. We appreciated our staff for how hard they worked. So that just kind of was, those were the only 4 we had. We didn't have all the other fancy ones. And that worked so well for us. The other thing we did, we used that for our annual evaluations. And we would put a plus or a minus or an X. And if you weren't quite hitting it where you were, or, you know, if you were a minus, that was a concern area. And it really allowed us to build a culture in the organization that was filled with gratitude. And it was just so much more calm. And we had a 5% turnover when I left. It was just wonderful. And in today's age, you know, it's tough to do that. But and Michelle, you shared your resource, which is fabulous. Thank you so much. Did you have a question or something you'd like to share?
I don't know if it's a question or a commentary or it's just thoughts that have been going through my mind. You know, I've been in my role for 8 years. I've been in an executive role probably more than 15, 20 years. And what I feel like we're at is this pivotal moment where the boards of those that are social impact nonprofit organizations have always, as traditionally operated in the way that we were described. We now have this evolution where we know we want more accountability, we want more intelligence around the mission, you know, and we also need to fundraise because the systems haven't caught up with the fact that we need to be sustained, right, to be able to do all of that. And so I feel as if I'm on this road of what I call the messy middle, right? It's what we had isn't working. We don't know what the thing is in the future that will actually be I don't want to call it the magic sauce because there never is a magic sauce, but like the model to follow, right? So I feel like we're on this journey of creating whatever the new models might be. So I don't know if it's a question more than a commentary. It's as a CEO, kind of understanding that environment, how to best lead and how to best empower my board to lead themselves through the messy middle, because it's hard enough to be a board member. It's even harder to be a board member in the messy middle, right? Like, and so that's kind of where I am with the thinking and in terms of my board, because we just brought on 7 new board members and they're phenomenal, but they're new, right? And so anyway, so that's kind of
There's a lot of people there, Michelle, a lot of people. And we are at the top of the hour, but I'm going to finish this one up. And I know Tish has a question, but let's Anne.
I was just going to say, I hear you. And I think one of the things that we don't do in organizations with our boards, even with our staff, is spend time having these actual conversations. We're always caught in the business and we get carried away. We spend inordinate amounts of time on stuff that somebody could just go and do and say, here, it's done. And instead, really impress on your board that you want your board meetings to be these conversations and talk about some crucial conversations, getting to the heart of this and saying, how do we make this board, you know, we want you to feel good as board members. We want you to feel like you're having real impact. We need you, but how do we make this real and not be afraid to have those conversations and talk to them about it feels messy. We're all in this messy, you know, we wanted CEOs or EDs to, like, we've all got it together and sometimes just say, I need your help here, folks. you're crucial to the success of this organization. Can we delve into this and get away from all of the time we spent going through that agenda with all of those items and say, let's have some real conversations. I also, just one thing and then I'll stop, is I started to do coffee or happy hour with Anne. And I would take 3 to 4 board members out at a time, and half of it was social and fun, and we got to know each other, and then we would touch on things. And building those relationships and having we would always share, it was not in secret, but those kinds of things you can get to the real stuff that you need to deal with.
And I will say that when I did get my certificate in board governance from Harvard, the one thing they taught us is every single board meeting, you need to have one strategic conversation. And that is that piece that's going to keep them at that level where you need them to be, as opposed to keeping them in the nitty gritty. And, and it will also attract those thought leaders that you really need.
And my board chair is absolutely committed to only having strategic conversations at our board meeting, right? That is absolutely her focus, and we've done that really, really well. But I love the idea because it really is about the relationship development, right? And I love that idea of kind of coffee or happy hour with a couple of folks. And, I'm always up for a good latte. So that's a good thing. Thank you.
All right. Well, Tish, I know you probably got some last words you want to throw out there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Michelle, you do have so many people right now rolling onto the board that Anne is exactly right. Getting to know them as people. One of the best things that I ever saw done is when I rolled on a bunch of board members all at the same time, we very cleverly, the board president and I would take 2 or 3 or 4 of them, as you said, Anne, to lunch, because there's just not really time in the board meeting to stop down and say, can you explain that? And what did that mean? And can you give the history? There's just not that time. And I found that the couple of lunches that we did and had, that those people, they really were very engaged. But we wouldn't have known that had we not given them time to ask those burning questions.
Yeah. And I will and on that last point, I will just toss this out because Gail had asked this question about what about people who can't give financially. We need to also be rethinking what people bring to the table. I used to have an 80-year-old former property manager who was worth his weight in gold and how much money he saved us from vendors who would have just, written, huge invoices, and he made sure that things got fixed, and they got fixed in a timely manner and done right. He saved us so much money. He was worth his weight in gold, and he could only write a very small check every year. So we really have to rethink what value people bring and not just writing a big unallocated check. So with that, I thank you all for being here. Hopefully you're enjoying this format of these, which is just kind of a conversation and thought leadership. Join us next month. We're going to be talking about CEO health and how do we make sure that we all don't end up in the emergency room or 3 times in the CCU as a CEO. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to continue to talk about balance and how do we stay sane in this environment. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.
A wonderful day, everybody.